Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom.
You all are further away now. You have to sing louder. That's part of the deal.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. The cantor couldn't handle me singing right next to her, so we moved the podiums back to the bima. And by vote, it seems all of you on this side really like how I sing, and only a few people over there chose to be on the cantor side, so I appreciate all the supporters. We invite our co-president, Andrew Meerman, to share announcements and welcome everybody here before we begin our service formally.
Shabbat Shalom. It's nice to see everybody up here and back to Temple. Thank you to Audrey Baker and Carol Freeman for blessing our candles and Kiddush tonight. And thank you, Alex, for all the beautiful music you've done in the past and for tonight as well. A couple announcements in case if the calendar is catching up on you. The first Seder of Passover is April 5th, so it's just around the corner. If you need any last minute supplies, the gift shop is open, so please go to the gift shop, and they have some essential stocks you might need. May the 20th is our musical fundraiser, Temple at the Troubadour. And we're going to go back in time to the 60s and 70s. Some of that's before I was born. I wanted to put that out there. The invitations are printed, but they're going to be going out next month. But you can register online. And obviously there's limited capacity at Weathervane, where the event is going to be at, and already people are registering. So get on top of that and register before you miss out. Speaking of registering online and getting upcoming information, we got a lot of programming coming up this spring. And if you're not getting the weekly emails, please reach out to the office to make sure that you have your email address listed with the temple. Or we also announce everything on social media, and you need some help on that, please call our office and they'll help you with that as well. Shabbat Shalom, and thank you for being here.
If you'll turn to those around you, say Shabbat Shalom, welcome everybody. Make sure that we know each other's faces and names before we light our candles. We'll turn in our prayer books to page 2 as we invite Carol and Audrey to make their way to the candles and light our candles for us as we bring light into this Shabbat. Page 2 in our prayer books.
Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat.
If you'll raise the Kiddush cup.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushenu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu, v'shabbat kadisho b'yahava u'v'ratzon hinchilanu. Zikaron lamasi v'reishit, ki hu yom dechila l'mikroi kodesh, zecher l'tziad mitzrayim. Ki vanu v'charta ואותנו קידשת מכל העמים, בשבת קודשך באהבה וברצון הנחתנו. ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת. אמן. לחיים.
Chaim. Having lit our candles and sanctified Shabbat with the words of Kiddush, we take a moment now to walk back through our week, to welcome in this Shabbat a day of peace, a day of rest, a day of being in community, a day different from the other 6, the day that we wait for. We begin with the words of Hine Matov found on page 10. How nice it is for us to be together with one another. How good it is.
How sweet it is.
How sweet it is.
To be together on this day. How good it is.
How good it is.
How sweet it is.
How sweet it is.
To be together on this day. Hine matov umanayim sheverachim gam yachad. Hine matov umanayim sheverachim gam yachad.
Page 20, the words of Lachadodi. We turn to these words as we welcome Shabbat into our homes and into our sanctuary. When we reach verse 9, we'll rise and face in those directions as we welcome Shabbat, not only with our words, but physically as well. Page 20 and 21.
Lecha dodi likrat kala, p'nei Shabbat nekabela. 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 Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad, Hishmiyanu el hamiuchad, Adonai echad, Shemo echad, L'shemo tiperet v'litchila. Lecha dodi likrat kala, p'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala, p'nei Shabbat nekabela. Likrat Shabbat lechu v'necha, ki hi mekor habaracha, merosh mikedem nesu שכבה תחילה. לך דודי לקרא כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקרא כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. התעוררי, התעוררי, כי באורך ומאורי, אורי, אורי, שיר דברי, כבוד אדוני עלייך נגלה. לך דודי, לך דודי לקרא כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקרא כלה, פני שבת נקבלה.
Please rise.
As in body or in spirit as we face our entrance and welcome in Shabbat as a bride. בואי ושלום עטרת בעלה, גם בשמחה ובסוחלה, תוך אמוני עם סגולה. בואי חלה, בואי חלה. לך דודי, לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה.
Please be seated as we continue. Page 22.
מזמור שיר, שיר ליום השבת. מזמור, מזמור שיר, שיר ליום השבת. מזמור, מזמור שיר, שיר יום השבת. מזמור, מזמור שיר, שיר ליום השבת. מזמור, מזמור שיר, שיר יום השבת. לי, 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 ינדה, לי, 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 ינדה, לי, 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 ינדה, לי, 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 ינדה, לי, 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 your turn. ינדה, לי, 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 ינדה, לי, 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 ינדה, לי, 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 ינדה, לי, 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 מזמור, מזמור שיר, שיר ליום השבת. מזמור, מזמור שיר, שיר ליום השבת. מזמור, מזמור שיר, שיר ליום השבת. מזמור, מזמור שיר, שיר ליום השבת.
Page 26.
יתגדל ויקדש שמי רבה, ויעמד יברח ידרתי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל. בעגלה, בעגלה, ובזמן קריב, ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך, לעולם עולמי עולמיה יתברך. יתברך וישתבח, ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל, שמי דקודש בריחו. לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דאמירן בעלמה, ואמרו Amen.
We'll continue our series tonight. You may not have known it was a series, but I'll tell you it was a series now. Talking about what's going on in Israel, looking at Israel at its 75th, talking particularly about the idea of brothers and sisters fighting with each other. We look at the words at the bottom of page 27. It's words like these that have come up a number of times at times like this, especially as for those of you who are in Torah study, we've been studying the concept of holiness as described by Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, but so too with our teenagers. I talk about this on Sunday often. Why do we have words in our prayer books? Why do we need words to guide us through what we need to say? Don't we know the words that we should be saying? And one answer is because we don't. As this says, sometimes we need to be reminded that entrances to holiness can be everywhere, that the possibility of ascent even in difficult times, even when we don't expect it or don't think it's possible, is in fact all the time. That even at unlikely times and through unlikely places, there's no place on earth without the presence of what is sacred and holy and what we call God. We stand now to affirm those words and the others in our prayer book as we turn to the words of Baruch Hu, page 28. Please rise. Page 31. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, from whom the evening flows. Your wisdom sets the way on which time and season glide. Your breath guides the sail of the stars. Creator of the tide of time and light, you guide the current of day into night. As heaven spans to infinity, you set its course for eternity. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, from whom this evening flows. Baruch atah Adonai, Hama'ariv Aravim. Page 32. Everlasting love you offered your people Israel by teaching us Torah and mitzvot, laws and precepts. Therefore, Adonai our God, when we lie down and when we rise up, we will meditate on your laws and your commandments. We will rejoice in your Torah forever. Day and night we will reflect on them, for they are our life, and doing them lengthens our days. Never remove your love from us. Praise to you, Adonai, who loves your people Israel. Pages 34 and 35.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto.
Please be seated as we continue together, page 36.
V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol lebavcha u'v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol meodecha v'hayu ha'devarim ha'ele asher Anochi mitzavecha hayom alavavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam B'shivtecha b'veitecha, u'lattecha v'derech, u'v'shokbecha u'v'kumecha, u'kshartam le'ot al yadecha, v'hayu letotafot b'neinecha, u'ktavtam al mezuzot beitecha, u'v'yisharecha. L'ma'an tizkeru v'asitem ekol mitzvotai v'tem kedoshim l'Elohechem ani Adonai Elohechem asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim liot lachem Elohim ani Adonai Elohechem.
Pages 40 and 41. We prepare to sing the song of men and women joined in understanding and respect, the song of God's miracles, an earth protected and cherished, a gift for our children and the generations to come. The song of a land once ravished by war, now quiet and content, her soldiers home to leave no more. The song of a world redeemed, our song of peace. Page 40.
Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nehedar v'kodesh, nora tehilot oseh vele, nora tehilot oseh vele. Malachutecha ra'u v'necha, bokei hayam lifnei Moshe, ze'elianu v'yameru, ze'elianu v'amaru, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh, nora tehilot oseh vele, nora tehilot oseh vele. Please turn to page 44 for our prayer for Shabbat B'Shamro. B'Shamru v'nei Yisrael et HaShabbat, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם, בני ובני ישראל אותי לעולם, כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, וביום השביעי שבת וינבש.
We turn to page 46 now as we rise and share the words of our Amidah, our most personal prayer.
Adonai sifatai tiftach ufi yagi tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu ve'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzhak, v'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, v'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanora, Elayon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'Konei Hakol, V'Zocher Chastei Avot V'Imahot, Umevi Geula Livnei V'neihem, L'ma'an Shemo Be'ahava, Melech Ozer U'Moshia U'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham V'Ezrat Sarah, אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי הכל אתה רב להושיע, משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם, מחולל חיים בחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר, מי כמוך בעל גבורות ומידו מלך, מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה להחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי הכל.
אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלה, Baruch Ata Adonai, Ha'el HaKadosh. Please be seated. Page 59. Please join with me at the top of the page. God of goodness, we give thanks for the gift of life, wonder beyond words, for the awareness of soul, our light within, for the world around us so filled with beauty, for the richness of the earth which day by day sustains us. For all these and more, we offer thanks. Baruch Atah Adonai, Hatov Shimcha Ulcha Na'eh Lahodot. We turn the page 60, as we share the words of Shalom Rav in our prayer that everywhere that faces strife and war and unrest, whether it is between citizens and brethren or whether it is between countries, wherever those on this world find enemies, we pray that they can find peace. We join together, page 60.
Shalom Rav, Shalom Rav, Shalom Rav, Yisrael Amcha. Shalom Rav, Shalom Rav, Yisrael Amcha. Tasim Leolam, Shalom Rav. Ki ata melech adon, melech adon, l'cho hashalom. Ki ata melech adon, melech adon, l'cho hashalom. Shalom Rav, Shalom Rav, Shalom Rav, Yisrael Amcha. Shalom Rav, Shalom Rav, Yisrael Amcha. Tasim leolam, v'tov beinecha levarech et amcha Yisrael b'chol עת ובכל שעה בשלומך, בשלומך. Shalom Rav, Shalom Rav, Shalom Rav, Yisrael Amcha. Shalom Rav, Shalom Rav, Yisrael Amcha. Tasim leolam. Shalom Rav, Shalom Rav. Please take a few moments for silent meditation. תבל ואמרו אמן. יהיו לרצון אמרי פי והניון ליבי לפניך. יהיו לרצון אמרי פי אדוני צורי וגואלי. יהיו לרצון אמרי פי.
Shabbat Shalom. We'll see if anybody can unseat our history champion, Harvey Krieger, from last week. We have two questions this evening. The first is that the temple in Jerusalem in the Bible and we believe in history was destroyed not once, but, oh, good, look, you all get a point. I'll come to the second question in a moment. There's debate about what happened that it was destroyed twice. It was a major issue theologically for the Jewish people because the temple represented the central power of God. Like we would say, Washington, D.C., not only in what happens in Washington, but also symbolically, Washington, D.C., and all of the buildings, the Capitol, the White House, that they all symbolically represent the central organizing power of our country. So when the central organizing power of your country is destroyed twice, you start to question how powerful that power is. The first time they said, well, it was because the Jewish people were being bad people. They weren't following the commandments. But by the second time, they said, now they've learned their lesson. So what is it that they're doing? They're following the mitzvot. They're not worshiping idols like they did before. And the rabbis told this story, that the reason the second temple was destroyed was because of a man named Bar Kamsa. There was a wealthy man who wanted to have a party, so he said to his servant, please, I want you to go invite this man named Kamsa to my party. Well, the messenger goes out and he ends up inviting Bar Kamsa, which if you translate from the Aramaic means the son of Kamsa. Well, it turns out the son was hated by the person who was throwing the party. So he shows up at the party and the man says, you can't be at my party. He says, well, look, I'm already here. I'll pay you for the food I'm eating. He says, no, you can't be at my party. I despise you. He says, look, I'll pay for half of the entire party. I'm already here. Don't make me leave. He says it again. He offers to pay for the entire party. And still, the man picks him up, moves him, takes him out of the room in front of all of the leaders of the community, all of the rabbis who were famous in the Talmud. And at that point, Bar Kamsa is so angry for having been shamed that he then starts planning little attacks against this man, and it goes back and forth. And eventually they say the temple was destroyed because the Jewish people were fighting amongst themselves so much. Because one person got invited to a party he wasn't supposed to be invited to. So here's your second quiz. 4:30 a.m., April 12th, 1861. Confederate troops fired on Union forces at Fort Sumter in South Carolina's Charleston Harbor. 34 hours later, the forces known as the Union surrendered. What was it? Well, yeah, you can say it. Yeah, you got it. Right. It's called the beginning of the Civil War. November 6th, 1860, 6 months earlier, there was an election. It brought what was then the new Republican Party to power, electing Abraham Lincoln. He was voted in entirely by representatives from the northern half of the United States. 3 months after that, 3 months before the shots were fired at Fort Sumter, Vice President John Breckinridge presided as the Senate chaplain. This is all on the Senate website, by the way. he shared the following words before the Senate. "Hear our petitions and send us an answer of peace," he prayed. "May all bitterness and wrath be put away, and may senators deliberate not as partisans, but as brethren and patriots, as we seek the highest welfare of the whole country. Hear us and hear our land." And then the clerk called roll call, and 10 senators walked out. In the month that followed, 25 of the 66 members of the Senate left, supporting the Confederate cause. So, decide whether you were right or not. When was the beginning of the Civil War? Was it when the shot was fired? Or was it when the people started talking to each other and stopped believing in each other and started dividing themselves? History books will tell you that it was when the first shot was fired. But the reality is, civil wars start with a civil war mentality. This was a phrase I heard this week as I was listening to Israeli author and intellectual Yossi Klein Halevi. He said the following, speaking of what he sees today happening in Israel. "When we see violence, it is not the beginning, it is the inevitable, practical expression of a mentality of civil war. And what is this mentality? It's when anger turns into rage. It's when opposition turns into hatred. And once you've created that emotional infrastructure for civil war, physical violence follows. If your opponent, your Jewish opponent, is evil and you hate them, and you find yourself in a state of rage and despair, that is a civil war mentality." What we're seeing in Israel today and what we've seen in America, perhaps in the last decade, is a move that comes very close and may even cross the line into a civil war mentality. We see this mentality when we hear about Israeli Air Force reservists walking out of the Israeli Defense Force, refusing to show up for duty. We see it when protesters who live in the same city, pay the same taxes, fight for the same army, are throwing objects at each other across the street. And even in the last 24 hours, it was seen when Prime Minister Netanyahu met with the Prime Minister of England in London amid protesters. Not something that's so unusual, except that the protesters were, of course, Jewish and Israeli, waving the Israeli flag and asking for him to be arrested. My friend and colleague who grew up in the London Jewish community explained to me, it's a sign of civil war mentality when the London Jewish community, far more conservative-minded than the American Jewish community, openly protests the Israeli government. And it says a lot, as he said, when my mom, an Israeli British citizen, who's never taken to the streets to protest anything, feels she has to be there. So we're seeing a civil war mentality. It's among our people, it's in our country. And I think a lot of the questions that I see as we had our panel the other night at the JCC, the number of people who are showing up in larger number than we're accustomed to, the number of questions we're getting, the emails and the articles, we're paying attention because perhaps we don't know what to do as we watch civil war unfold. But this is not the first time that Israel's had to face this mentality. We could probably all remember or are well aware of the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. Not by a foreign militia, by Israeli citizens who opposed his politics, who hated him for what he stood for as a fellow citizen and leader of their country. And so their hate turned to violence, it turned to assassination. You also may remember the images of the IDF forcibly dismantling Jewish Israeli settlements when Ariel Sharon ordered the unilateral evacuation of Gaza. Israeli soldiers in IDF uniforms with the Jewish star on their shoulder going into settlements mostly inhabited by very visibly Orthodox Jews and physically removing them, putting them into their armored vehicles and driving them back across the Green Line into Israel. But the most obvious example of civil war might be one that you may not be aware of. It happened in the very first month of Israel being a state. It's the story of a ship called the Altalena. In the spring of 1948, there was a Jewish militia called the Irgun. There were lots of Jewish militias prior to the state being created, formed from all sorts of different groups, and they were fighting for the independence of Israel. But once May 14th, 1948, once the state is declared, it is also declared that there will be one Israeli defense force. But this Jewish militia called the Irgun, in that very time that Israel was declared a state, they had already filled a ship and sent it on its way to what was at the time Palestine, but became the state of Israel, filled with more than 900 soldiers and packed with military weapons. The ship, the Altalena, arrived on shore, and even though the IDF had been fighting the War of Independence, and there happened to be at that moment a ceasefire between them and the Arab states, the Irgun was seen to be a force that wanted to plan a coup. It was led by somebody whose name you may recognize, Menachem Begin. He would later become the prime minister of Israel. The IDF, of course, led by Ben-Gurion. The two of them were in negotiations for the Irgun to join the ranks of the IDF, but when the Altalena made landfall in June of 48, it was unclear to those in the IDF if the Irgun was coming to join them or be against them. So for 2 weeks, they fought each other on the shores of Tel Aviv. 16 Irgun fighters, 3 IDF soldiers were killed. In the midst of the fighting, Begin, who was on the ship, flew a white flag of surrender from the ship and insisted that his troops stand down. He later said, "My greatest accomplishment was not retaliating and causing a civil war." Years later, 10 years before he would become prime minister, in June of 1967, Menachem Begin, a politician, was asked to go to Ben-Gurion's house to ask him to serve as the prime minister again. Ben-Gurion then said if he had known Begin as he did in the 60s, back in the 40s, the face of Israeli history would be quite different. Two people who became prime ministers, who led the same army just 20 years prior, had their soldiers killing each other on the shores of the very country they would lead. Today, some will say that the laws being put forward to limit the checks and balances in Israel step across a line that we can't accept. Others will say that for too long, the judiciary and other groups in power have ignored or even suppressed the voices of a large number of Israelis, most of whom are not of Ashkenazi descent, most of whom are not white Europeans, most of whom are Orthodox. Two groups, both worried severely for democracy, one who says this hasn't been democratic for a while, one who says you're putting democracy in a coffin by the laws you're trying to pass. Both of them yelling at each other, both of them protesting in the streets at each other, both of them threatening each other. Wherever this started, it's clear it's on a path that leads to a place that we don't want to go. It has too many similarities to the history of the United States in 1860, and perhaps we would say it sounds a lot like the United States in the last few years. All of this makes me wonder whether we should worry that we're on the verge of a civil war, or worry that a civil war has already begun, both in Israel and America alike. Next week, I'll do my best to talk about how civil wars end, having tried to do my best to talk a little bit about how they begin. In the meantime, I pray that this Shabbat we can learn from the wisdom, the end of the story of Ben-Gurion and Begin, two men who led the state of Israel who once fought each other, who had the ability to stop and realize before things got too far that when they came to know each other, when they came to realize that they should be fighting for the same values and not against each other, that they were also brothers in a country and among our people, that they needed to sit down and talk and figure this out. I pray that we'll have the time to have those discussions, that the world will slow, that those who are pushing these ideas will talk to those across the aisle and vice versa, and that we can, in fact, stop this civil war before it becomes anything that is out of our control. Shabbat Shalom. We'll turn now to our Torah service as we'll begin a new book as we start the book of Leviticus, Vayikra, and we bring our Torah before us. I'll tell you, those of you out there in the hinterlands of the window area, if you want to touch the Torah, it's going to be over here. We're not going to walk all the way around there. It's just a fair warning. We'll rise now as we'll turn to page 250 in our prayer books, as I invite Andrew Meerman to open our ark as we'll take our Torah and begin our Torah service.
Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, ki mitzion tetzei Torah, udevar Adonai mirushalayim, Baruch shenatan Torah, Torah, Baruch shenatan Torah, Torah, le'amo Yisrael b'kedushato, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonai, Kadosh Shemo, Gadalu Adonai iti, Uneramema Shemo Yagdav, Lecha Adonai Hagedul V'Hagevura V'Hatiferet V'Hanitzach V'Hahor, Ki Cho B'Shamayim U'Va'aretz, Ki Cho B'Shamayim U'Va'aretz, Lecha Adonai Hamamlacha V'Hamitnaseh L'Chol Arush. Al Shlosha Devarim, Al Shlosha Devarim, Al Shlosha Devarim, Haolam Omi. Al Shlosha Devarim, Al Shlosha Devarim, Al Shlosha Devarim, Haolam Omi. Al HaTorah ve'al Havodah ve'al Gemilut Chasadim, Al HaShlosha ve'al HaTorah ve'al Gemilut Chasadim.
Please be seated.
Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Vayikra el Moshe, Vayidaber Adonai elav, me'ohel moed lemor. Daber el bnei Yisrael v'amarta lehem, Adam, ki yakriv mikem, korban l'Adonai, min habhema, min habakar umin hatzon, takrivu et korbanchem. Imola korbano min habakar, zachar tamim yakrivenu, al petach ohel moed yakrivoto, litzerno lifnei Adonai. V'samach yado al rosh ha'olah, v'nirtzalo l'chaper elav. ושחט את בן הבקר לפני אדוני. והקריבו בני אהרון הכהנים את הדם, וזרקו את הדם על מזבח סביב, אשר פתח אוהל מועד.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torat emet, v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Amen.
Thank you to Barb and to Irv. Thank you for blessing our Torah so beautifully and being on our bima. Thank you. You can go back to your seats. The first words of the story of the book of Leviticus, they start, it's really the first phrase that's the most important, or perhaps the meatiest. The remaining phrases that Cantor Kathy chanted are mostly the beginning of the details of the tabernacle and the sacrifices. It's the first phrase, Vayikra, which says, and God called out to Moses and said to Moses these particular words. It's taken to mean that this is often taken to mean that God spoke directly to Moses and gave Moses all the instructions, and Moses then took all the instructions, and that the people didn't hear anything else, and it solidifies the relationship of Moses and God. And we see many, many more times in the Torah the same sort of formula, although never with the word Vayikra. It's usually, Vayikra means God called out to Moses. It's sort of a greater, a louder voice, if you will. We usually see it then thousands of times throughout Torah, that Moses speaks, and they use the word lemor, that Moses shares these words. So a lot of times this Torah portion, and therefore this book, are taken to be the moment in which God shared these particular words very personally and intimately with Moses, and then Moses shared them with everyone else. With the story before us, with the words of Moses and God as they were in conversation on our minds, we take those words, we offer them as the strength of our story to those who are in need of healing. We think of all of those people in our lives now, those who are suffering of mind, of body, of spirit, those in need of help, of community, of doctors and nurses, of medicine, those in need of support. We offer them these words of Misha Berach, page 253.
Sheberach Avotenu Makor Habracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen.
If there's a name you'd like to share, please share it as I look around the room.
Kathy Meyerson, Mark Fishman.
And Dory Hoffman.
Mi sheberach imotenu makor habracha le'avotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen.
Please rise as we return the Torah to the Ark.
V'zot haTorah asher sam Moshe lifnei bnei Yisrael al pi Adonai b'yad Moshe. Yalalai, 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 עץ חיים היא למחזיקים בה ותומך מאושר דרכיה דרכי נועם וכל נתיבותיה שלום השיבנו אדוני אליך ונשובה חדש חדש ימינו חדש ימינו כקדם. Page 282 for Aleinu. עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כאן, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד.
Please be seated. It's a fearful thing to love what death can touch. It's a fearful thing to love, to hope, to dream, to be, and to lose. A thing for fools, and yet it's a holy thing to love. For your life has lived in me. Your laugh once lifted me. Your word was a gift to me. To remember this brings a painful joy, as we are reminded that it is a human thing to love, a holy thing to love what death has touched. This week, we remember those that we've lost in our community in these last 4 weeks. In the period of Shloshim, Harvey Efron, Lois Noble, Stephen Heyman, and Frida Guerin. We add to their names those that we lost at this season in years past: Ina Adler, Lillian Altman, Gertrude Beyer, Yetta Blyman, Stanley Dersch, Dr. Herbert Dutchman, Helen Diamond, Donna Uranka, Isidore Jim Ellison, Marion Frost, Jane Gibbs, Richard Gibbs, Florence Gottfried, Harold Horvitz, Howard Klein, Eleanor Lipman, Pearl Weiss Marks, Melvin W. Meerman, Ernie Nog, James Perelman, Charles Rich, Samuel Rosenblum, Ethel Cooperman Schultz, William Sillins, Theodore Snyder, and Francis Selman Zake. If there are names I mispronounced or names you'd like to add, please share them. We rise, page 294, as we honor our loved ones with the words of Mourner's Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, Be'alma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei, B'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chaye dechol Beit Yisrael, B'agala uv'izman kari v'imru, Amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mevarach leolam almei almaya, Yitbarach, v'yishtabach, v'yitpa'ar, v'yitromam, v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar, v'yitalev, v'yitalal, shemei dekudashah, barichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tush b'chata v'nechamata, damiran bi'alma v'imru, amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, amen. Osei shalom b'mromav, huya asei shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, amen. Having connected with those that we've loved and lost, we now connect with each other as we bless each other with the words of the priests. May God bless you and keep you. May God's light shine upon you, and may God be gracious unto you. May you feel God's presence within you always, and may you find peace. Please be seated. Before we conclude our service, we'll take a moment to share any Shakianu moments that we may have in our lives. Share a little bit about each other before we go to our oneg, our to-go neg, I believe. Get to anything good. It can be the smallest thing. Sandy, you're driving. Sandy turned 16 this week. She passed her driver's test. Well done. Wonderful to hear. Yeah. Go ahead, doctor. Wonderful. Youngest grandson of how many grandchildren? Of 4, turns 11. Wonderful. All right, we need one more for a complete circle here. Yeah, go ahead. "13 lifesavers in the..." Wonderful. And so for those that didn't hear, there's a CPR class. Is that what it's? Yeah, CPR class. There was one. We had 13 people go through it, and there's another one in May if you want to join. Jake? I couldn't hear him. What was it? Your great-grandson? Made like Superman. It's almost as big as driving for the first time. So with all of our joys and blessings before us, we close our Shabbat service with the words of Shakianu, and then we'll share in Motzi together as we'll get to go continue sharing in each other's lives. Please join with us.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehechianu v'kimanu v'higianu lazman hazeh.
Invite Carol and Audrey to hold our challah as we join together in Motzi.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen.
Shabbat shalom, everybody. We hope you'll join us out in the lobby as we sing our way out.
Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel ve'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel ve'imru shalom b'mromav, ישראל, ועל כל יושבי תבל, ואמרו אמן. Shabbat Shalom.